So please help me give a warm welcome for Asa Raskin.
Hey guys, well, so I know she just stepped out, but I still feel like we should give another round of applause to Heather because that was amazing. It's a nice slide, but we're way in the middle of things. Actually, talking with Heather was amazing going around, besides the part where I got really drunk. Getting to talk to her about depression is an incredibly opening experience. I've been in sort of the open and honest thing. I've been going through my own bout of it in the last 6 months or so. So having that kind of open conversation and getting rid of that stigma is really amazing. So anyway, I'm at Asa on Twitter, and we heard a little bit yesterday about empathy. And actually, I think it's one of humanity's greatest vulnerabilities. And that's what this talk is going to be about, but we'll get there. Now you can see why I chose this shirt. So the single most valuable commodity is attention. We value attention so much that we give our kids drugs when they don't have enough of it. In the last generation, just within one generation, the number of kids diagnosed with ADHD, that kind of stuff, has gone up not just 100% or 1,000%, it's gone up 100,000%. And that tells you what we as a society value. In fact, our companies are valued based on the amount of attention they get and steal from us, so much so that, Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix, in his last investor meeting, he said, do you know what he said Netflix greatest competitor is? Yeah, exactly. It was sleep. Because it's a zero-sum game. And what is this doing to society? This is Van Gogh. You guys, I'm sure, know Deep Dream, right? So what these things are doing, these algorithms that optimize for engagement, they're deep dreaming our society. Because what is Deep Dream? Deep Dream says, whatever I've been trained on, let me see, and I'm going to look into the image, and if I see that, I'm going to project more of it. You get stuff like this. Here's another one. I just really like it. But there's something interesting that goes on here because it starts to wash out the normal features as you sort of do this feed-forward network on society. And you get this strange homogenization effect where the things that our algorithms see, what Facebook's feed sees, what Twitter's feed sees, what the entire milieu of finding the content that generates the most outrage, the most engagement, and promoting that, this is what we get. And so our technology now is dreaming us towards our most outraged, polarized, and anti-diverse selves. As we heard yesterday from Mary, this is a quote actually from I believe it's from the 60s, that technology is neither good nor bad, but nor is it neutral. The technology we create and the things that we value are what we project into the world. So, humans can't help but stop and look at car crashes. And so all of these algorithms show us car crashes. And this is what we get. This is actually an ad, I think it was for MSNBC. So what will we do? What won't you do? This is why you watch. This is fascism as spectacle. This is what happens when you value the kinds of things that we do. In fact, in Silicon Valley, we value attention so much that we trade what is right for what works. As we do this, we A/B test our way to immorality. So this is something I found right after the election. Makes me so sad to be American sometimes. Somebody had figured out a way of gaming Google, because Google's just like, cool, whatever gets the most hits, I'm gonna put up here. So it claimed that Trump had won the election right after the fact. I liked it because right down below they actually knew about it. It said that Google had been hacked. And so this fake news thing, though, like we can't think of it as just a problem that we can go solve. Instead, you have to think of it not as the source cause, but as a symptom. It's a virus that lives on top of the attention economy, right? It's just a natural outcome of when you have an entire system which is based on grabbing people's attention. Of course, you're going to find the things that give people outrage. The fun thing, though, is that it's going to get much worse. How many of you have seen the face-to-face stuff? Anyone? No? Cool, one. So check this out. These are researchers that are using sort of the new stuff in machine learning to be able to use, in real time, a webcam to get anyone to say anything. This next one is my favorite, though. Because Putin doesn't ever really smile, so... So you realize what's going to happen. Like, humans are visual creatures. The only fake news we've got so far has been just essentially text. I guarantee that this is going to be an app on your phone within the next 3 years. That means anyone at any time is going to be able to make these kinds of videos. I don't have a demonstration up here, but Google's been working on a thing called WaveNet, and it lets you do the exact same thing, but now with audio. So you, on your smartphone, within 3 years, are going to be able to make anyone say anything, and it's going to be indistinguishable from reality. Just imagine the kind of fake news that we're going to get. It's going to be exciting. Because reality is what people collectively believe. Which means that reality is what people can be persuaded to believe. One of my favorite examples of this is this woman, Elizabeth Loftus, who does amazing work in memory. And some of her early work was implanting false memories in people. So how you do this, it works roughly 25% of the time. You find somebody's friends, you ask them to give you 2 real stories, and then you make up a 3rd story. Then you get the person to come in, you present them the 3 stories, and around 2 weeks later, when you ask them to recount which one of the memories, like what their experiences, 25% of the time that memory has ended up being implanted. And they'll claim that it's a real memory. And so she then was like, cool, I know that the best way to predict people's future behavior is to know their past behavior. So maybe the best way to control their future behavior is to change their past. And so she started planting false memories of things like of getting sick by eating like a bad egg. And indeed, the people that she implanted false memories into would avoid eggs for the next month. So whatever you can persuade people to believe becomes true. And so I'd like to, I've been reading 3 Body Problem recently, awesome sci-fi, if you haven't read it. I'd like to introduce some cosmological sociology and introduce the law of self-singularity, which is that given enough time, every species sufficiently intelligent will eventually reverse engineer itself. how it believes, why it believes. In fact, we're all fascinated by this. This is why we love behavioral psychology. And we are not that great at doing behavior change right now, but we're getting better and better and better. And the entire weight of our economic system is standing right behind pushing us to understand how to persuade ourselves. At the same time, we've actually, with CRISPR, we are starting to be able to reverse engineer our own genetics. It's a pretty exciting time to be alive. And the one thing that sort of gives me hope is that every sentient creature has to go through this at some point, but then you sort of like, wait, the Fermi paradox, maybe this is why it hasn't worked out. So I think we can then think of singularities in sort of first and second order. So the second order singularity is an external threat. So this is like the standard Kurzweil in AI. When the AI becomes super intelligent, then, bad things. But I think there's a first order singularity that comes first. And that is when we understand the architecture of how and why we believe things, then you can control people and what they do. And we are getting into some really interesting territory. And so here's my prediction. Before we get super intelligent AI, we're going to get super persuasive AI. AI that can convince us of almost anything. So Twitter bots have already effectively passed the Turing test. Something like 40%, so there are 48 million Twitter bots, 40% of the content for the last US election came from bots. And it turns out bots get more retweeted and have more reach because they find the right content, they put it up there, they can do it more consistently. And instead of having a Turing test, because humans can't actually, or computers can't yet fully pass Turing tests in the full medium of being a human, but if you restrict a human down to being a tiny little tweet, turns out the computers are just as good as us. And you can talk, there are these amazing reports of reporters that go and try to figure out which is a Twitter and which is a human. They can't. You have to use external sort of signals. And so you have to ask this question, like, if Twitter bots have already passed the Turing test, doesn't that mean that our society is in fact already partially cyborg? Yay! This is interesting. In the US, for the last couple of years, we have started to use AI to sentence people and to determine their recidivism rate, how likely they are to recommit a crime. That means, and because it's the US, these are private companies that do it, and you can't open up the code and see what they're doing. So literally, computer programs are figuring out who to send to jail and for how long. The problem is that, whenever you like extract stuff out of data, that data, it's not neutral. And so there's a big thing in ProPublica just last year where it turns out that these AIs were racist. And they would undervalue the risk of whites and overvalue the risks of African Americans. So you can start to see how an AI can end up being super persuasive and have huge implications for our society. Even though we haven't really caught up with the ethics of that yet. So, Cambridge Analytica, have you guys heard of it? Yes, no, yeah. Apparently hugely influential in the last election, and it came out of the work of Kosinski and Stilwell, where they're able to show that you can predict somebody's like how successful they are, whether they're a drug abuser, their skin color, their personality, with remarkably few data points. So, here's the question. Given this number of likes, an AI will know your personality better than your coworker, good friend, or family member. So how many likes do you think it takes an AI to know you better than a coworker? Anyone have a guess? I heard 7, 50. The answer is 10. And for a good friend, 70. And for a family member? Infinite? It's a little smaller than infinite. And it turns out to be better than your spouse is only 300. The average number of likes people put on Facebook is 227. And so what this company, Cambridge Analytica, was doing is that they would use the information about your personality as gleaned from this better often than your spouse knows you, and often they found even better than you yourself seem to know you, and they would modify the ads. So they would be like, give us all the people that are a little bit extroverted, are closed-minded about things, care about defense, and then if we want to target an ad to you, we can do just the perfect one. So, data is personal. Whenever you talk about data, people are like, yeah, I sort of get it. So I want to make data really personal for you. So everyone, take out your phone, unlock it, and open up the Photos app, or whatever the equivalent is on Android. When you're done, hold your phone up. So I want to see all of the lights from your phones. Give them to me. Okay, it's getting good. You're still only like halfway there. Come on, everyone. You guys right in the center. All right, now take your phone and hand it to the person to your left. Yeah. You feel how creepy that is? But we give that data to Google all of the time. Exactly, I heard a no way in there. Yeah, your data is really personal. I also love doing this when people are like, oh, I have nothing to hide, so why privacy? And you get them to do this, and no one will ever do it. So where is this going? Well, if I want to make an ad that's like super influential to just you, what would I do? Well, let's say it's a political ad. I would take your face, I'd blend it with a little bit of the politician's face. So now you're getting, we all are naturally, our empathy sort of screws us over because it's easy to make things that we feel connected to. So as a little bit of your face, let's say we use WaveNet, we pull out the voice of, say, your father, so it has some nice authority going on there. You mix it together, you use your personality, and all of a sudden, this ad speaks to you. This technology is right around the corner, and we're giving up that data already. So this is not particularly science fiction anymore. And the computational asymmetry is growing. It's new, right? As companies get more and more data about us, and the computation power gets greater and greater, the antibodies we have to deal with persuasion just aren't enough. I like to think about this. So 100,000 times a second, Facebook serves an ad. You can imagine the speed at which these systems have to make these decisions. Their interests are not aligned with ours. So they take whoever is the highest bidder and shows whatever message, given all of the data we have to us. Now, maybe that message won't work for you or for you, but at scale, it absolutely works. And that's how we ended up with such a unfortunate situation in the US. And then I think about the future. Like I'm like, ooh, cool, VR. And I mean, I love playing with VR. But VR is the most empathetic medium humanity has ever invented. When I first started playing around with it, I had a friend who was scared of heights. So I rigged up a little pad so she could like walk around. It was on the very first Oculus. I programmed up this thing so she'd sort of walk to the top of a cliff and then I'd give her a little push in the real life and she would like fall and she'd shriek because she was afraid of heights and sort of flew. She did this 4 times in a row, and all of a sudden she was less afraid of heights. Like, VR is an incredibly empathetic thing. But empathy is also a rootkit that goes straight to our brainstem. if you can use technology to persuade for good, you can use technology to persuade for bad. The medium is the message, and this medium is not going to be neutral. We often like to think when we move to new mediums that we just get a fresh start, but of course the business models don't really change. So we have to be thinking about what we want to do as we play with these mediums. And sort of that's the point that I want people to think about, is that democracy requires open minds. That's what it's founded on. The ability for people to change their minds and make informed decisions. But democracy, that means, requires people to be persuadable. And that's the back door. That is humanity's 0th day vulnerability. And that's, I think, we're going to see, if we actually do see any sort of singularity with AI, it's going to come through this. And so we should be thinking carefully about how to give ourselves these appropriate antibodies. But perhaps the singularity isn't coming. The thing about being persuaded, as any great salesperson will tell you, is that when you are persuaded, you don't realize you've been persuaded, right? An example, I'm wearing pants. Most people in here are wearing pants, but if you look at the history of the world, pants were not the dominant form of lower body wear. That's a fairly recent sort of thing. You didn't think that when you woke up this morning that you were persuaded to wear pants, but your environment just made it so. So when you're persuaded to do something, you think it's your choice. So perhaps the singularity isn't coming. Perhaps the singularity is already here. The question is, how would you know? I'll leave you with this this lovely thing. It was her cartoon. My friend Sebastian sort of mixed it up. But yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we got to create a lot of user engagement. If you guys are interested to dive more, a lot of this talk came out of a set of great conversations with Tristan and Brian. Tristan is the founder of the Time Well Spent movement, where he's trying to move people from the time we spend in apps to times from filling our time to fulfilling our time. And Brian, who wrote Algorithms to Live By and is currently working on a book on ethical algorithms. So anyway, with that, thank you guys very much.
Hi, thank you. So question time. I will be asking Asa some questions, and if you have any, just raise your hand, and some of our volunteers will hand you the mic. And we have quite enough time, so feel free. So I think one of the, well, everything was interesting, but I think one of the things people reacted was the videos and how we can impact based on a live actor or an audio, make it appear that a person said or did whatever. Mm-hmm. Considering the impact new media has on our decision making, including people like heads of states, how do we fight that fake media, or however we want to call it?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question. Like, I think one of the things we've seen in the last couple of years, although apparently it's been going on from Russia from a lot longer, is that when you can destabilize what people think of as true, mm-hmm. then the person with the loudest voice wins. And so I think one way we're going to start seeing this move is that higher bandwidth communication tools, so things like VR, or if we get to holographic some things, like they're gonna feel more real to us. And so there's going to be a cat and mouse game for a little while, where we're trying to get mediums which don't feel like they can be co-opted quite like this, and then everyone else trying to catch up. But there's never going to be a sustained way for that to work forever. I think we're going to start seeing an entire field, which I guess I call defensive AI. So I would love to have a little AI that sits with me and sort of watches everything I read, and sees everything I see, and it cross-correlates with everything out there, and it can sort of be like my own little personal canary in the coal mine, and it can be like, these are the ways in which you were supposed to be persuaded today. And that way I can at least have a meta-awareness about it. So I think we're going to start seeing a wave of like, I mean, authenticity totally is a fraud, but we're going to start to see like a set of little bots that are trying to prove the authenticity of something, and then you're going to get the follow-on effects as they try to go back and forth. Interestingly enough, the latest advances in machine learning, the thing that's sort of sweeping right now are these things called general adversarial networks. And the way they work is they use an AI as an adversary. So if you want to take an image, and actually this is an art piece that I'm currently thinking and working on. It's taking a GoPro, essentially, and recording, like, say, a month of my life. Then I'm training an AI to generate images that are indistinguishable for me from images from my life. So that is to say, like, it'll show people that I've seen or amalgamations, and you train it back and forth. He's like, does this look real to you? Yes, no, until it's indistinguishable. And we already know that human memory is very valuable, and so I'm going to start having a computer dream for me. But anyway, these general adversarial networks, they try to generate an image, and then the computer guesses whether it was real or not. And then you train both of the networks at the same time as it guesses better or worse, and these things are winning in pretty much all of the machine learning. So these adversarial networks, I think, are going to become incredibly important in defensive AI.
Basically going to have to develop technology that would warn us if something doesn't sound right, and we will have technology that will be able to impact us in a way that we won't be able to distinguish which, like in your example, what were the faces we actually saw, or what were the faces that a computer created based on everything we saw in the past.
Yep. But you can see how this already puts us onto very thin ice, because if you don't trust your own little judgment,
then what can you trust?
Exactly.
So you also talked a lot about persuasion and behavioral psychology. At the moment, the topic around those two fields is around ethics. Recently, we had an example of Uber using social psychology principles to impact drivers to work more and drive more. At one side, they're overworked and they're not feeling happy about their work, about their life. On the other, they're earning more and the company is earning more. And while we have fields like healthcare, where using those principles to advance someone's health or way of life is a no-brainer, we consider it very beneficial, we have those that are on the line. So where we draw that line, where is something ethical and something isn't?
So this I'm going to draw a lot on the work of Tristan Harris. And there he talks a lot about you have to be able to align the interests or the desires of the individual with the persuasion. But this gets tricky. Let's take YouTube videos. This is a really simple example. YouTube at the end of a video shows you all these different videos, maybe even like has a little countdown to go to the next one, and you sit there and you watch it. So clearly that was a choice, right? Like you decided to watch that video, maybe you even liked it a bit, it has more cats, but you know, you go to sleep a little bit later. There's a difference between the you and your intentions in the moment as the experiencing self versus the remembered self. It's sort of the difference between like, oh, hey, I would love to eat these French fries right now, but in the future, I'll be really mad at myself for having eaten the French fries. So which version of you do we even listen to as we decide what ethical persuasion is? Yeah, I think it's an open question. There's, in Homo Deus, there's sort of this great line talking about the line between healing someone and upgrading someone is similarly blurry. So as we start looking at CRISPR, the ability to, say, remove genetic disease, well, what's the step between removing a disease and then augmenting so that the person is less likely to get the disease, to like all of a sudden being a little stronger so that they can have better pattern? Like that line is very blurry. I don't know yet what the right answer is.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the audience? Jeff? No, here it is.
I'm a big fan of sci-fi as well, and I always am fascinated by how sci-fi is a really good predictor of what we imagine becomes a reality maybe decades later, but in our lifetime. So a scenario like in Manchurian Candidate, or even in the recent Ex Machina, where we see technology used to manipulate people like you've been talking about. In your opinion, are we there yet? Or is it, how close is it to?
Yeah, I think we're totally there. Everything, I mean, Heather was talking about sort of the fraud of authenticity, people not being able to determine what is and isn't an ad. That's already a kind of influence sort of at the global scale that's having this effect where everything becomes more and more homogenized and more the same. And of course, what does that do? That means we have a diminishment of diversity, which means that it makes us as a society much more fragile. So we're starting to see it there. And if these things, as sort of like we as humans, or the fake news stuff, right? Like, I don't think fake news and social media was the only reason why we had Trump get elected and we had Brexit happen. But I think it certainly accelerated those trends. And these are playbooks that are just going to get better and better and better. So I think we are already there. And as behavioral psychology gets better, as our targeting gets better, as the amount of data we collect about people goes up, and as the amount of computational asymmetry continues to rise, yeah, it's just going to get worse.
A follow-on question, you talked about the canary in the mine and sort of technology to help us determine what's real and what's not and how we're being persuaded. Do you foresee any kind of social divide, I mean class divide, between people who could have access to such canary technology to warn them, and then the hoi polloi who have no access to such technology, and seeing that sort of the more easily duped masses versus those who have access to better technology to help us defend against that sort of thing?
That's fascinating, and yeah, I think we're absolutely going to see that. Great question.
One more. Oh, one up. I cannot see. One over here. One over here. Oh, sorry. You're next.
Hi. Okay. With technology advancing faster and faster in these fields, right now we're addressing the product placement in YouTube videos, things that happened 3 or 4 years ago. Do you think that it's going to get even harder for laws to catch up with what technology is going to do? Where there's more and more time passing and more things that are not addressed by laws.
Yeah, and it's also a tough balance because you don't want to stifle innovation, like put your foot down before these things happen. Like, is it the government's place to say that some advertiser can't go through my Facebook images? Let's say, actually I gave a talk about this a number of years ago. I'm like, would I give an advertiser, if they paid me, say, $50, they could go through all my Facebook photos and modify the brands that I was using in my past. Again, it's sort of like modify your memory to change your future. Like, it's ethically weird, but I gave consent, so yeah, it's going to be really hard for governments to catch up. And that's why, I mean, I think the crux of it, though, is around the attention economy. If we can put limits on how companies can go after and steal our attention, what kind of techniques they can use, the kinds of data they can collect about us, then I think you can start to get interesting sort of like legislative answers here. But yeah, it's an open field. Really, the reason why I gave this talk is because I don't think we have good answers yet. It's not just that I want to get up here and be like, oh no, the future, but rather it's to be like, we together, like, we are both part of the solution and part of the problem. And so if we can determine and create the vocabulary to talk about these problems, that at least this gives us the ability to have a conversation to start to find the solutions.
We are out of time, unfortunately, so just two quick questions. The one I mentioned in the intro, reading through your interviews, I saw that you have a quite interesting success philosophy. I think something you inherited from your father. Can you tell us more about it?
Oh, sure. I mean, the past doesn't really exist, right? So, so it's just whatever you're thinking or working on next. I find interesting. I mean, that's pretty much it. I think looking back, the past is useful for like mining for things that can help you in the future. Or another way of saying it is that we're all just equations of motion, and so we just want to figure out like, yeah, the past doesn't happen, the future isn't here yet, so it's only now, and so whatever you're doing now is.
So what is ASA working on next?
Oh, so I have a little company called Other, and we're playing around with some of the solutions to these problems. You can check out I mean, it's not public or anything like that, but you can check out a super early version that tries to mix digital and physical. The code name is Orca Chat, like ORCA, but
Exclusive.
yeah. It's just a thing. And then the thing I'm getting really excited about is ways of using machine learning in areas that we don't normally think about. So I'm really inspired by Carl Sagan when he turned Voyager around and he took that picture of Earth, like that pale blue dot. He's like, all of human war, every love story, every tragedy happened on this insignificant pale blue dot. And I'm always looking for ways that we can frame shift ourselves outside so we can see humanity from the outside. And I think if we could find or show using machine learning that animals have a true expressive generative language, it sort of like removes the last dividing line between us and animals. And I think that could be pretty cool. So anyway, that's the thing I'm thinking about.
Well, thank you and good luck with all your future projects.
Thank you much.